as the standoff between the United States and Iran continues to teeter on the edge of open and sustained military conflict. Voices from within America's most senior military ranks are beginning to speak, and what they are saying deserves careful attention. Among the most significant of those voices is a retired four-star general who spent more than 4 decades in uniform, commanded some of the most consequential military operations of the modern era, and now dedicates his expertise to analyzing the conflicts that are shaping the world we live in today. His assessment of the war with Iran is neither simple nor comforting, but it is clear, grounded, and informed by a lifetime of experience that few people on earth can match. The general in question served as commander of the United States Central Command, one of the most powerful and consequential military commands in the world, from 2016 to 2019. In that role, he oversaw counterterrorism campaigns across the entire Middle East, directed operations against ISIS in Iraq and Syria, managed 2 simultaneous civil wars, and led the strategic planning for America's military presence across one of the most volatile regions on the planet. Before that, he commanded forces that participated in combat operations in southern Afghanistan in the years following the September 11th attacks operations that tested American military doctrine in ways that would shape strategy for generations. After more than 4 decades of service, he retired and transitioned into the world of national security analysis and military strategy, advising governments and think tanks on the complex and rapidly evolving challenges facing the United States and its allies. His views on the current conflict with Iran carry the weight of direct personal experience, not theory, not ideology, but for decades of hard-won knowledge about what war actually looks like from the inside. To understand the war with Iran, the general argues, you must start not with the present, but with the past, specifically with the Islamic Revolution of 1979. That event, he explains, was not merely a change of government. It was a fundamental transformation of Iranian identity, Iranian politics, and Iran's relationship with the rest of the world, particularly with the United States. When Ayatollah Ruhollah Khomeini returned to Iran to lead the overthrow of the monarch, a government that had maintained close ties with both Washington and London, he did not simply replace one regime with another. He built an entirely new kind of state, an Islamic republic driven not by the logic of conventional geopolitics, but by ideology, by faith, by a deep and historically rooted conviction that American influence in Iran was a form of domination that had to be resisted at all costs. That conviction, the general notes, has not faded in the nearly 5 decades since. It has been reinforced generation after generation, through the deliberate and systematic cultivation of anti-American sentiment as a cornerstone of Iranian national identity. The supreme leader, first Khomeini, then his successors, has maintained that posture with iron consistency, suppressing internal uprisings and public protests when necessary to preserve the ideological foundation of the state. Understanding this history is not optional. The general argues, it is essential, because any analysis of the current conflict that ignores it will fundamentally misread what Iran is, what it wants, and how far it is prepared to go to get it. One of the most important points the general makes, and one that he returns to repeatedly, is the danger of false comparisons. Many analysts and commentators have drawn parallels between the current conflict with Iran and America's previous wars in Iraq and Afghanistan. The general acknowledges that there are similarities: asymmetric warfare, proxy forces, complex political terrain, the difficulty of achieving clear and measurable victory. But he is equally emphatic about the differences, and those differences matter enormously. Iran is not a fractured state. It is not a collection of competing warlords and tribal factions operating in the absence of centralized authority. Iran is a nation of more than 85 million people, with a functioning government, a sophisticated bureaucracy, a deeply embedded ideological framework, and, crucially, a military establishment that has been developing and modernizing for decades with the specific goal of deterring American power. The general places Iran at approximately the 16th most powerful military force in the world. That ranking reflects capabilities that would have been unimaginable to many observers just 20 years ago. Iran has developed a missile arsenal capable of reaching targets across the entire Middle East and into parts of Europe. It has built an advanced drone program that allows it to strike distant targets at minimal cost and minimal risk to its own personnel. It has invested heavily in cyber warfare capabilities that can disrupt critical infrastructure, financial systems, and military communications, and it maintains a naval force specifically designed to control and, if necessary, close the Strait of Hormuz, the single most important choke point in global energy supply. The general's comparison of greatest relevance, he says, is not Iraq or Afghanistan. It is Ukraine and Russia. Two conflicts, he argues, that are deeply interconnected, sharing strategic logic, shared actors, shared weapons, and shared consequences. The war in Ukraine and the war in Iran are not parallel events happening in isolation. They are part of a broader reshaping of the global order, and they must be understood as such. Perhaps the most sobering element of the general's analysis concerns the tactics Iran is likely to employ and has already begun employing against American military forces. Iran, he explains, understands perfectly that it cannot defeat the United States in a conventional, symmetrical military engagement. It cannot match American air power, American naval firepower, or American precision strike capabilities in a straight head-to-head confrontation. It knows this, and so it does not plan to fight that way. Instead, Iran relies on what military strategists call asymmetric warfare, the use of unconventional tactics designed to neutralize superior military strength. Hidden bombs, explosive devices, proxy forces operating in multiple countries simultaneously. Drone swarms launched from dispersed locations, missile barrages designed not necessarily to defeat the enemy militarily, but to impose costs, financial, human, political, that erode the will to continue fighting. This is not a new strategy. It is, in fact, the same strategic logic that extended America's involvement in Iraq and Afghanistan for 2 decades, and the general warns that its effectiveness should not be underestimated simply because the tactics are familiar. One of the most striking moments in the general's analysis involves a specific and deeply significant military incident, the downing of a US F-15 strike fighter jet. Reportedly, on April 3rd, by what analysts believe was either an advanced air defense system or a shoulder-mounted missile operated by Iranian forces, the loss of an American fighter jet to enemy fire was, the general notes, the first such event in decades, and its significance extends far beyond the loss of a single aircraft. It demonstrated, in the most concrete terms possible, that Iran possesses the capability and the willingness to engage and destroy American military hardware in direct combat. The rescue operation that followed was extraordinary in its scale and complexity, involving a total of 155 aircraft, including 4 bombers, 64 fighter jets, 48 tankers, and 30 dedicated rescue aircraft. The sheer size of that operation, designed to retrieve 2 downed pilots, speaks volumes about both the value the U.S. military places on its personnel and the level of threat that Iranian forces were able to project in that environment. The general notes that official statements following the incident presented a picture of confident American military dominance, but he observes carefully and diplomatically that those statements were not entirely consistent with assessments from other credible sources. The incident, he argues, is a sobering reminder of what the general calls the complexity of information warfare, the gap between what is said publicly and what is actually happening on the ground. The general devotes significant attention to the Strait of Hormuz and its strategic importance, not just for the United States and Iran, but for the entire global economy. Hundreds of tankers are currently stranded in the region, carrying an estimated 20,000 crew members between them. The disruption to global oil supply chains is already being felt in energy markets worldwide, and if the strait remains closed or contested for an extended period, the economic consequences will extend far beyond the Middle East, affecting Asia, Europe, and every nation on Earth that depends on the flow of oil to power its economy. The general is explicit. The Strait of Hormuz is not simply a military objective. It is a strategic lever of enormous power. Iran's ability to threaten, restrict, or close the strait gives it a form of leverage that no amount of American air power can entirely neutralize, because the threat to the strait is not just military, it is economic. An economic pain, inflicted on a wide enough scale for a long enough period, has its own kind of strategic power. The conflict with Iran, the general emphasizes, is not a bilateral confrontation between two nations. It is a regional and in some ways global conflict with multiple active fronts, multiple armed actors, and consequences that extend far beyond any single battlefield. In Lebanon, Hezbollah, which operates with Iranian support and direction, has been using Lebanese territory as a base for missile strikes against Israel, displacing hundreds of thousands of civilians from the south of the country toward Beirut and the north. The human cost of those strikes, measured in destroyed homes, shattered communities, and traumatized populations, is enormous, and it receives far less international attention than the general believes it deserves. In Yemen, the Houthi movement, also backed by Iran, controls significant territory and continues to threaten shipping in the Red Sea. In Iraq, Iranian-aligned militias operate with considerable freedom, complicating American military operations and political objectives in a country that has never fully stabilized since the 2003 invasion. These are not peripheral conflicts. They are integral components of Iran's broader strategic design, a network of proxy forces and aligned actors that allows Tehran to project power across an enormous geographic area without committing its own forces to direct confrontation. Despite his confidence in America's long-term military superiority, the general is candid about the uncertainties that shadow this conflict, and candid about the questions that remain unanswered. The failure of diplomatic efforts to constrain Iran's nuclear program, which Iran insists is intended purely for civilian energy production, and which the international community increasingly fears is a pathway to weapons capability, removed one potential off-ramp from the current crisis. Without that framework, the strategic calculus becomes significantly more dangerous. The general also raises serious questions about the political management of the conflict, specifically about the role of Congress, the adequacy of consultation between the executive branch and the legislature, and the degree to which the American public has been kept informed about the true nature, scope, and cost of the military campaign. He argues that the lack of clear public communication has made the conflict more politically contested and more vulnerable to criticism, both domestically and internationally. In the end, the general's view is neither optimistic nor pessimistic. It is measured, realistic, and grounded in a lifetime of experience. He believes that the United States possesses the military capability to significantly and sustainably degrade Iran's military power over time, reducing its missile arsenal, weakening its naval forces, diminishing its ability to project force across the region, and ultimately undermining the material foundation that keeps the current regime in power. But he is equally clear that this will not happen quickly. It will not happen cleanly. And it will not happen without cost in lives, in resources, in political capital, and in America's standing in the world. The war with Iran, in his assessment, is not a conflict that will be resolved in weeks or months. It is a long contest between an ideologically committed adversary with deep historical roots and a military superpower with overwhelming conventional strength, but limited patience. For the ambiguity and grinding cost of asymmetric conflict, how it ends, he says, remains genuinely uncertain, but how it is managed with clear strategy, honest communication, and a sober understanding of the adversary will determine whether the outcome is one America can live with.